wasn't expecting The Dark Knight Rises to be a masterpiece. If you went into it thinking, I bet this one's going to be better than The Dark Knight in every possible way, you're probably either extremely stupid or one of those obnoxiously optimistic types that keeps giving me those disappointed looks every time I make a disparaging comment about someone or threaten them with grievous bodily harm. The Dark Knight wasn't going to be topped, and I think a lot of people were aware of that. I certainly was. I went into this movie thinking I'd be able to walk away saying, you know, that was okay. Such was not the case. The Dark Knight Rises is basically the worst film ever made. Sorry, that was a lie to make sure you were still paying attention. Let's back up a bit. Talking about a movie like this is sort of difficult because there's so many things that should make it a good film. The acting is all good, it's beautifully directed and scored, the soundtrack is unbelievable, most of the dialogue is great, and yet I still can't call it a good movie because it gives me the impression that Christopher Nolan decided that he didn't want to write coherent stories anymore, and apparently elected to do the entire scripting process after taking 3 hits of acid and watching an episode of CSI Miami. But we'll get to that in a second. The first thing you need to know about The Dark Knight Rises is that Batman is barely in it. Seriously, it's about a half hour into the movie before Christian Bale gets into the Batsuit, then he loses it again for another hour, and then he finally shows up again during the last 10 minutes. See, Batman isn't really the protagonist of his own movie. For some inexplicable reason, Joseph Gordon-Levitt is. Now, Levitt is a great actor, and he does great in his role as a policeman turned detective who's helping Commissioner Gordon deal with Bane and blah blah blah, but the problem is that he's not Batman. I'd totally go to see Joseph Gordon-Levitt PI, but I came to see Batman punch people, damn it. Okay, now that I got that out of my system, let's talk plot holes, and we're in luck because The Dark Knight Rises hands out plot holes to the masses like an insane homeless man hands out fear and the smell of tobacco. I'm seriously not entirely sure what happened during the writing of this movie. Maybe everyone just decided that having a well-thought-out story was for squares, so instead they all had a race to see who could come up with the most illogical plot possible. The winner was awarded several $1 million and enough fanboy rage to keep them depressed for the rest of their life. Yep, I made a list of the damn things. We'll talk about them in order of absurdity. Number 1. The first time Batman gets into a fight with Bane, he gets the crap kicked out of him and Bane breaks his back. If you've read the comics, you know that this is pretty much the only thing anyone remembers about Bane. So fair enough, that has to happen. So then Batman ends up in a prison/pit of character development that Bane grew up in, and it doesn't matter right now. The important thing is that he gets his vertebrae shoved back into his back by a prison doctor, as if it's a dislocated shoulder or something. Later, during the final battle with Bane, Batman pretty much totally kicks his ass. Yes, the man who's currently recovering from having his spine dislocated is apparently able to trump the guy that did it in the first place. Number 2. Speaking of the horrible death prison, how does Batman get back from the horrible death prison after escaping from it? Because at this point in the movie, Bane has taken over Gotham and Batman is stuck on the other side of the world with no money, no mode of transportation, and no shirt. He has less than 12 hours to get back there, and he does. Somehow. The movie doesn't actually tell us. So go him, I guess. Number 3. At the end of the movie, Batman uses his plane to carry a nuclear bomb out to sea, allowing it to detonate in the middle of the ocean, saving Gotham. So he's seen as a hero by the public, and we're led to believe that he perished in the explosion. Then, Morgan Freeman finds out that he set the autopilot on the plane and escaped, and Alfred finds him living in Europe. So ignoring the fact that Batman only had 2 minutes to fly away from the city according to the timer on the bomb, meaning he couldn't actually have gotten that far out into the ocean and Gotham is probably consumed by radiation now and all of Batman's friends are suffering horrible mutations, how did Batman get away from the explosion even if he was using the autopilot? He's clearly shown flying over the water while wearing the Batsuit, so if he ejected himself from the plane, then all the body armor he's wearing would probably have just made him drown. This wouldn't be much of a problem if actually killing off Batman wouldn't have carried far more emotional weight than the ending the movie actually has. Number 4. When Alfred finds Bruce Wayne in Europe, he's apparently settled down with Catwoman, who has been previously established as a sociopathic, kleptomaniacal murderer. I guess that's not technically a plot hole, it just makes Batman really stupid. Number 5, and this one's my personal favorite. When Batman is in prison, Liam Neeson shows up and explains that Bane is his son. Liam Neeson's son, that is, not Batman's. Which turns out not to be true, but there's still a connection between the two characters, and the important part is that Batman thinks it's true. Then it turns out that Batman is hallucinating and it was an imaginary Liam Neeson, like the one in my dreams. But there's still a connection between him and Bane, and it's important information to the plot. So Batman learned something vital about the main villain of the story from someone who wasn't actually there. And now, just for fun, here's a list of things that aren't plot holes but are really, really, really stupid. 1. Why does Bane sound like Sean Connery? 2. Why the fuck does Bane sound like Sean Connery? Seriously, in the opening scene when he had the bag over his head and he started talking, I was like, oh sweet, it's gonna be a Sean Connery cameo, and I was disappointed. 3. If you're gonna hire Michael Caine and let him play the role with all the best bits of dialogue, don't put him on a bus for almost the entire movie. That's just being wasteful. 4. Getting into things that actually matter. The character of Miss Tate turning out to be the villain was probably the funniest thing that's happened in a film in a long, long time. If you haven't seen it, basically, a secondary character who's been sleeping with Batman and helping him develop an alternative energy solution suddenly stabs him in the chest, says that she's Liam Neeson's daughter, and we find out that she's been the mastermind behind the nuclear bomb plan all along. In the last 5 minutes of the movie. I am not making this up. 5, and this is actually my real problem with this movie. Bane is not an interesting villain, because he has no motivation for what he does. Now, with the Joker, this worked, because that was the point. He was a force of chaos and pure evil, something Batman couldn't understand and had to deal with. Bane, on the other hand, is just kind of a dick for no adequately explored reason, and this is a major problem. If we have no context for who the villain is and why he does what he does, why should we be invested in the plot? Why should we care if Batman succeeds or fails? All these inconsistencies and dumb choices by the directors and the writers and whatever are annoying, but I could have overlooked them. The real problem with this movie is that it has no drive. It's a story driven by a villain who has no clear motivation or goals, and it's boring. Another problem is that Bane's beef isn't with Batman, it's with Harvey Dent, who's not in the movie on account of being dead. So he's just kind of angry and shouts about rich people being douchebags. The premise of having Bane take over the city, releasing the city's criminals, and ruling it as a warlord is incredibly interesting, and the movie doesn't do anything with it. It's frustrating. In conclusion, you should probably go see it, because apparently I'm the only one who actually cares about this sort of stuff.